Um, all right, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off since we're at noon. Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 6 of Forum at ShortFest. My name is Anna Souza. I am the Forum producer. We also have Harrison Harvey here from our Forum team. We've got a couple more panels and conversations planned for you today and tomorrow, so please be sure to check out the schedule. You can register right up until they start. Big thank you to Corey, who is our captioner today. There are settings at the bottom if you would like to enable those captions. And I'm just really excited to be here for this conversation. Please feel free to use the Q&A box to submit any questions. We'll try and get to those before the end of the conversation. And welcome to Working with Actors. We have a phenomenal group here with us today. And to kick us all off, I'm going to hand over to our fantastic moderator, Janelle Riley of Variety.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm a big fan of this festival. I've been there as both I don't know if you'd say filmmaker, but with things I've written and just to see some amazing movies. And I'm so thrilled to be here with today's panel. I'm just going to give short introductions for each of them. And I want to start with the direct filmmaker of one of the best films of last year. She won the Someone to Watch Independent Spirit Award for Farewell Amor. Please welcome Ekwa Msangi. Hi. We also have joining us the award-winning filmmaker whose work includes The Soul of a Tree and See You Then, Mari Walker. A casting director whose credits include Rami, Emily in Paris, and Hereditary. Please welcome Rebecca Dealy. And we have a filmmaker and actor. You've recently seen him in She Dies Tomorrow. He's also the founder of the streaming platform No Budge. Please welcome Kentucker Audley. And I believe in a short amount of time, we'll be joined by another actor, Deanna Gibson. But in the meantime, whenever I have people as accomplished as you all are, I actually love to go back to the beginning and ask, what was the first job in the business, the moment that you felt you could call yourself an actor or call yourself a filmmaker, or the first thing you ever did casting on? Where did you sort of get your start, and what do you consider that gateway job? And let's start with Rebecca.
My first casting job was a TV series for NBC called Believe, which was about a 7-year-old empathic magic child. It made, I think, 11 of the 13 episodes on air. So it wasn't a hit, but it was also the kind of show where absolutely everything could possibly go wrong, and it did. And it was like a crash course in learning how to basically do anything you can. And I look at it fondly because it was such a mess, but it was incredible people, and learned actually how to get through things when they're really hard on a production level, which turns out that has also stayed true throughout the rest of my career.
And you kept wanting to do it, so that's a good sign.
Yeah, well, television also is a particular puzzle, but the idea that you could do things really well, really quickly, and really collaboratively, that it fostered that early on. And it feels really rewarding when you can actually do that with a short amount of time. Not dissimilar to a short, like it's great having 6 months to do a movie, but when you have to do something really well, really fast, it's actually a bit more rewarding, I think.
Absolutely. Mari, what about for you?
I started my career in Los Angeles doing a lot of editing. But really, like, the first big project that I ever worked on was in college. I co-edited a feature documentary called Going Home about one of my friends who's a Korean adoptee who went back to find his birth family. And it was one of those like chaotic experiences, but one of those experiences where you absolutely fall in love with making movies, and those friendships that last a lifetime. But I was really blessed to have that. But it was a lot of independent work. Just a lot of like scrounging around trying to find friends who were working on projects, and then eagerly asking them if it's possible if I could work on it, and just sort of building it out from there. A lot of network stuff.
And how much has that changed over the years, or do you feel that's still sort of what you're doing?
I think it's still sort of what I'm doing. Even on my first film, it was a lot of my college roommates, friends from home, people that I knew along the way and picked up along the way in Los Angeles. Makes it feel like family.
And Kentucker, for you?
Yeah, it's kind of similar to that. I feel like just started making shorts and making small homemade projects with friends in college and right after college, and trying to just kind of figure out how it all comes together. And I think as out of necessity, I sort of started acting in some of these projects, just because I was around and I would work for free, and so and then I sort of started getting asked to do other projects from friends, and then that sort of evolved into slowly but steady sort of getting more work. And then along the way somewhere I sort of fell in love with the short film format, and started a short film streaming platform called No Budge, which is something that I do just to sort of like keep my toe in the water of like what the young filmmakers and short film filmmakers are tuned to, and what their movies are feeling like. And so we also have live screenings in Brooklyn, but we also have a new streaming platform with apps on Apple TV and Roku and Amazon. And so just I kind of like to just mix it up, and whenever an opportunity comes to act, I'll act, and I also write and direct. And yeah, but No Budge is also kind of my singular focus at the moment.
What do you love about the short film format? I mean, I have my own thoughts, but I'd love to know yours.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just an opportunity to really have a lot of leeway to make something that doesn't conform necessarily to a typical Hollywood structural kind of format, and it gives you a lot of experimentation room to experiment, and it gives you a lot of just like creativity and ability to really find some unique nugget of something that maybe isn't fully formed, or maybe isn't sort of like palatable in like a Hollywood way, but it is expressing something really personal or truthful to you. And I think that gives a lot of freedom for young filmmakers and developing filmmakers to find a voice.
Absolutely. Ekwa, what about for you? What was sort of the first time moment you felt you could call yourself a filmmaker?
So after I graduated film school, my first gig was a TV series that I wrote and was going to direct in East Africa. There was a South African company opening up in East Africa where I grew up in Kenya, and they put a call out for shows, and I pitched something and they accepted it. So I went in completely green as to like, I basically, my plan was to shoot this show, this TV season, like a really long film. And we didn't have a casting director, so I ended up doing all my own casting for the show, which was a great experience to just kind of really learn actors and how to work with them. It was, it ended up taking a really long time. The casting process took a long time, mostly because the producers were really disorganized. And similar to what Rebecca experienced on her first, the show crashed and burned, and there were a lot of really dramatic moments in that experience. But I got to work with actors for 5 months, which was really amazing. And figure out a writing room and work on all of these scripts and get a whole production together, as tenuous as it was with the experience. We did end up on air for 4 weeks across 32 or 36 countries across the continent of Africa. And then it crashed and burned. But I learned a lot.
I'm noticing a reoccurring theme that maybe your first experiences weren't entirely positive, but you obviously loved it because you came back for more.
Yeah. I mean, it was significant enough where even though I was wounded and it took me a really long time to kind of recover, I could finally see what I could do. And I think that's really important as a filmmaker. It's one thing to have a bunch of creative ideas, but when you get to actually see your work come to life in front of you, that's a very different experience. And it kind of gives you a lot of energy, which is why short films are so wonderful, because without as much money, as much crew, as much whatever, you can actually see your work. You can see your creative work at work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're here to talk about working with actors. And I guess I'd love to just go through the whole process of, writing the project and then in the casting room and then actually getting to set. So I guess I'd like to start with the filmmakers. I'm curious, do you ever write roles with actors in mind, or do you find that sort of dangerous? And how open do you try to be when looking for actors? How specific is your vision?
I can go. It helps because I'm a writer. It helps me to write with somebody in mind as like a placement figure. I try not to get too connected to whether they will be the actual person, but it just kind of helps me as a reference, sort of how that person moves or how they talk or what their style is or whatever. And I can kind of write to that and then try and cast, if that person's available, then great. And if not, at least something close to that has been my method, just to avoid too much heartbreak if they're not available.
And if they're not available, do you sort of look for that type, or are you completely open? Have you ever been surprised?
Yeah, I mean, Farewell Amor is my first feature. I've done several shorts before that and some web series and different things like that. So for shorter projects that don't have a whole bunch of money behind them, a lot of what determines who you get is how much money you have and how much time people have available, because they're working for free and I can't fly them out from wherever, so they're kind of local, and so it's kind of logistical reasons which tend to take over. But working with Rebecca on my feature was really lovely. There were a few characters that I had a very specific person in mind. And she brought some people in and was just like, what about this? And it was useful to have somebody else to sort of, who wasn't in my head while I was writing, to offer another option and to encourage myself to be open enough, and the energy between us where I trust her, that she's not just bringing somebody completely out of the clear blue sky, but someone that might have something that I might not have seen. That's also a very big possibility, and it can be a wonderful surprise to find somebody that you hadn't initially thought of.
Kentucker, what about for you? I mean, especially as someone who's an actor as well, like how often do you write with yourself in mind?
Well, I usually write hoping that I don't do it, and then I end up, oftentimes that I'll end up doing it sort of like as I said, as a necessity. But in my first projects, I wrote sort of like thinking this was a completely different character, and then I would audition for people, and they're like, they're not quite getting it. And then I just realized I had written myself, and no one else can be me. So that's a bad case study. But yeah, it's sort of different for different projects. I think I like to write with people that I'm really excited to work with in mind, and just sort of like oftentimes it's more outline-ish, and I'll just I'll write something that a person that I'm really excited about their acting can sort of inject their own spirit and personality into. So oftentimes I'll keep it really loose, and but yeah, I usually don't go through a traditional casting process in that sense. I'll sort of just reach out to people directly and say, like, this, if you're interested, this is the part that I've sort of thought of you for. And but it's different for every film. I'm curious how I'm curious to get more into the typical casting process for my feature films, but I haven't really gone down that road too in depth at the moment.
Mari, what about for you?
I sometimes write with actors in mind, sometimes I don't. For my feature, I definitely had certain friends that I knew I wanted to cast because I love them so much, and they're my dear friends, and I think they're massively talented. But for my two leads, I had no idea who I was really going to cast. And I kept it pretty open sort of throughout the writing process. And then as we started getting closer to casting, I started thinking about certain people and trying to like mix and match who might be really good together, because so much of it was based off of chemistry. It's really just a two-hander between these two characters. But one of the things I really wanted to focus on was making sure that Chris was a trans character played by a trans actress, and Naomi was an Asian American character played by an Asian American actress. And that was really, really important to me. And something I really was firm on. But I think in that process, what was really amazing working with our casting director, Donna Morong, and just working with casting directors in general, I think can just really offer that outside perspective and introduce you to just this massive amount of people. And it can be really challenge you and challenge what you had initially perceived within the script. And they can allow you, and you want to find the actor that's able to pull that thing out of the script that really surprises you. And sometimes that could be through casting through a casting director. Sometimes that could be just through friends that who just sometimes really surprise you. A lot of my friends have really done that.
How many of you have sort of used your short films as a way to, test working with an actor, and then you went on to cast them in other things? I mean, I don't know if you thought of it as a test at the time, but, if you really work well with someone, it seems completely natural to use them again.
Yeah, I mean, I have, and I know other people who've done that as well. Sometimes it's not necessarily the people that I know, it's not necessarily a test because not everyone can afford a test shoot. But I mean, having sort of a beloved actor that you love working with is relationship building. And I think certainly short filmmaking is one hell of a relationship builder in a lot of different ways. And so it can certainly help you see that person, aside from just an audition, and also give you a taste of what it's like to work with them. Because, seeing people after the finished moment is a very different experience from actually working with them, can be a very different experience from working with them. Or show you what you don't want, and not necessarily because they're horrible people, but because I thought that I wanted an alpha somebody, for this part. And it turns out I really need somebody who's the complete opposite of that. And now I know because I've seen it. It can be a wonderful way to sort of test run a story idea, a character, and who you might need for that character.
Yeah, I think so much of the actor-director relationship hinges on this sense of respect and mutual trust and appreciation of each other's work, and I think I think it's really a fruitful opportunity to work with the same people multiple times, and I think there's just becomes this shorthand and this I think that a lot of the potential pitfalls with that relationship and that dynamic is a lack of communication and understanding of who each other are. And I think with the repeat working experiences, I think that's really invaluable to build that appreciation and respect. And I think that's the core. For me, that's the core sort of the thing that you're trying to achieve as a director and as an actor.
Yeah, and I think you also want to give them as many opportunities as possible. If you really connect with them and you want to be with them, you want to be around them on set and have that shorthand, and it's really great to just help them also build their career as you're building your own.
Yeah. And Rebecca, as a casting director, I know that every filmmaker you work with is different, but what kind of parameters are you generally given when starting a project? I mean, do you sit down with the director and really go over their vision? Do they just give you the script? And again, I know there's no one answer, but what's sort of the general process?
When I meet directors initially, I think a huge part of what I'm doing is try to articulate their process for them in my own language and in the way I work, because if they are a newer or first time or second time filmmaker, they're still in that process of finding out what their process is. And that can be frustrating on any scale, because the more people involved and the more people telling you what to do, I can just see it manifest in directors in all sorts of ways. So I really try to take my cues from them and listen to the actors they're talking about, how they're talking about it, how they're talking about actors they worked with before, what they like about actors, I will say, when it's presented early on, and a lot of people are writing what they know if they're newer writers to begin with, which makes total sense. But when they are based on people that they know really well or are family members, sometimes they sort of forget to bring the casting director into the intimacy of that relationship, which is hard. How do you just, I think probably people try to unpack some of those relationships their whole lives. But it does feel like I'm trying to crack a code that I don't have all of the rules for or understand it. So I like having a lot of communication so that when I can present options that aren't going to be the real person, I can tell them why it still works or why I think it would be interesting or what this actor can do to make the part their own, as opposed to you get a lot of like, no, just not quite right. And I'm pretty sure that's often based on look, which is also fine. But it's hard to get the redirect of where to go when it is a personal relationship because I'm not inside their brain, but I'm trying. So that's a lot of it. Like those meetings early on are like, okay, how quickly can I get inside of this person's mind? And so vision, and then where can I guide them? How far did they want to go within that moving forward?
It sounds like a little bit like you in addition to being a casting director, you're a therapist to some degree.
Definitely through pre-production, I feel like that a lot of the time. But yeah, I mean, it's the beginning of the articulation of their vision, like by the time they get to me, hopefully things are really ramping up and they're about to happen and they're about to be so many things under their purview that this is a sacred space and casting to just focus on the integrity of the story and the people they want to populate their world with and why. And so it's a precious time because then I know as it gets closer to production, I'm going to lose those conversations. So I try to have them like front loaded as much as possible.
Right. And it looks like we're joined by Deanna Gibson, who's an actor as well. Thank you for joining us. And I actually want to ask the actors, so I guess Deanna and Kentucker, I know that quite often, you just get sides for an audition. You don't even understand what the whole project is. Is there anything that excites you about a project when you get a breakdown or anything that like sort of stands out to you? Or are you just, happy to go in for whatever they're looking for?
Well, for me, I'm very attuned to director. I think I always look for the director, the previous work of the director more before I even look at any sides or script or even character description. I look at previous work of the director, and if I see a real vision there or some sort of connection point that I can understand where they're coming from, or there's some stylistic thing that I'm responding to about the work, then I'm okay. I'm really engaged in this. Like, well, what is this going to be now? What is this character? What is the story? So for me, I think the previous work is so vital for me to understand the sort of starting point of what this project is, how it's going to feel. Because everybody can write a character description or script, and it could go a million different directions. It really doesn't. For me, it doesn't say a whole lot. Because it can one character description, it could be beautifully written, and then it's sort of never on screen, and then one character description is like a sentence and it's kind of vague, but you can see it on screen very clearly. So that's kind of what I gravitate. I think that maybe coming from a filmmaking background, that's an easier endpoint for me.
Deanna, what about for you? What are there specific auditions that have really grabbed your attention for any particular reason?
Really, with me doing Wiggle Room, that's like really my first audition. So I really don't know too much about like auditioning and like what to look for in certain scripts or like roles. I mean, with the role that I played, it was more of like jumping into it, like into the character of how that character needed to be. So really, I mean, just by doing that one like film, I guess I could say that jumping into whatever the role is, I can probably be able to do.
And, you know, there's a kind of an air of mystery around auditions because there's no like correct answer, so to speak. Rebecca, I have heard from so many casting directors that when an actor comes in, they're not just auditioning for one role. You know, you will remember them down the line. They're auditioning for all sorts of future projects. What would you want an actor to know coming into that room? Anything that you know, pet peeves, you know, just any words of encouragement?
I mean, I think nobody likes an audition, not even a casting director. We just haven't figured out a better way to do it. You know, like it's a bizarre experiment or experience to try to approximate anything in a room that's often tiny, painted blue. There are strangers, you know, there's so many different things that are strange about the experience. And so there's not as much of a power play as I think actors or a hierarchy of as actors may feel like coming in one of many, that it's like we're also like, I have filmmakers that are like, I cannot hear these words, I hate hearing my, you know, like everyone's having their own experience and it's probably stress based. So everybody has that, and that should just be like a baseline for the process, knowing that it's just the best thing we can figure out of how to connect people and show artists what actors do, and if their vocabulary is compatible with the filmmakers. But I would just offer to be as prepared as possible in whatever it is you do. I mean, the truth is almost nobody gets the job. One person gets the job. So you can't hedge your bets. I almost always see filmmakers responding to something beyond their comprehension. You know, it's just whether or not they believe someone and whether or not it rings truest to them. And even if they think they know why they're choosing a certain actor, I'm not really convinced they definitely know why. It's just an instinctive thing. So offer it, offer your art, offer yourself, offer your understanding of the piece and what the role would feel like with you in it. And then walk out the door and go back to anything else that you're doing, because all you can do is offer that. And as a casting director, I want to see the consistency of the offering, of an actor just coming in like, hey, this is how I read the piece, this is how I do the piece, this is how we would connect, and go on their merry way. And the more they do that, the more I have a sense of where I can place them and who I can place them with in terms of filmmakers. And that gives me much more information, seeing what they're not perfectly right for, than someone coming in, I don't know them that well, they nail the audition and they're perfect for it. I actually don't have as much information about that actor as someone who I see come in consistently with their own perspective and their own art. It's more information, although it's incredibly vulnerable. So I understand and appreciate that. But the more you do that, the more casting will love you.
I'm actually really curious about, from the actor perspective, like Rebecca said, you know, one person out of hundreds of people is going to book that job. Most people are not going to book that job. There has to be so much rejection in the acting business. How do you sort of deal with that, you know, and you know, and stay sane?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear from the casting director perspective. That's because there is a ton of rejection. I mean, I personally don't. I mean, I do the opposite of what you just suggested, which is I rarely audition, because I do feel like it is such an unlikely endeavor. It's like, yeah, whatever, 50, 25 people are coming in for a role, there's one person can get, and it's sort of like the odds are stacked against you from the beginning. So it does, like, it feels like a disheartening process oftentimes. And it's sort of like takes a certain personality to keep putting yourself in that situation if it's hasn't worked out for a period of time. But yeah, I think the casting process is an art that really, like I said, I was glad to hear your perspective on it, because it is sort of at odds with the actor. perspective of like, you know, it just seems like there's this impossible task to be the one person in a room of 50 people. So I don't know if that answers the question. I'd be curious to hear what Deanna says.
Yes, Deanna, how do you sort of keep perspective in a very challenging business? She actually might be frozen. I can never tell if people are frozen or they're just being, taking a moment to pause, but hopefully she'll be back. What about for the filmmakers? It's a very general question, but what do you like to see in an audition room, and how can an actor grab your attention? And I would love to know, working under pandemic restrictions, if you've found that, you really actually enjoy Zoom auditions or, seeing tapes more than sometimes being in the room.
I haven't had an opportunity to do any casting during the pandemic, but I do think that self-tapes can be really great. They could also be a double-edged sword because it's giving the opportunity for the performer to do multiple takes, really get into a sense of really understanding that character and that one particular scene. But I've also had the experience of seeing that and then seeing those moments in that audition like side being sort of overcooked by the time we get to set because the actor's been thinking about it for so long and it's been so much in their head. But I think that the casting process is very brutal and difficult, and I feel like it's incumbent on us as the filmmakers, as the directors, the producers, the people in charge to create as open and welcoming of an environment as possible. In those times that I feel like I've hopefully been able to create that for the actors, I've seen them really blossom and like bring something new and have that comfortability, because I think that really allows them to loosen up. And especially for a lot of the films that I've done, they're very specific on like one or two characters. So really like getting to know that actor can be really helpful, and asking them questions and just being friendly and just being kind. One of the things that my co-lead always talks about, Lin Chen, is that she went to the audition for my film, and where the audition was taking place is where she had actually filmed part of her feature. So as soon as she walked in, she felt very comfortable, and she sort of treated the audition in a form of like, we're collaborators. And she was like, I was a first time filmmaker like 6 months ago, and now Mari's a first time filmmaker, and I want to treat her as somebody who's my partner. And I think that openness and that, especially for me, because I was absolutely terrified, because it was like my third day of auditioning ever in my life. And I was like so green. I was like, what do I say? Like I forgot to say like cut at the end of like the sides because I was like so entranced. And poor Lynn put up with me then for another, few months. But I think that just creating that welcoming, opening experience, I think allows for that conversation to happen and allows for those people's real personalities to come out and you to figure out who they are.
That's so cool to hear that like the director can be nervous in the audition room too.
Yeah, it's very nerve-wracking because, and it is that part of what Rebecca was saying, where it's like you're hearing your words really spoken for the first time, and in the process of writing a lot of scripts, I speak them out loud to my like co-writers and my collaborators, and after a while you get used to your own cadence, but then when you're hearing it from someone else, it just feels like something entirely different, and it can be very nerve-wracking. And you want to find the right person, you want to find somebody who you'll really connect with,
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think to add to it and to the idea of how nerve-wracking it can be for filmmakers as well, is that it's also a very short amount of time. So, I've had the experience sitting there next to my producer, and like after 20 minutes of this person just kind of like going through it once, going through it the second time, thank you so much, they leave. And then it was like, is it the one? Is she it? And it's like, I don't know. I haven't seen everyone. It's too much pressure. I don't know. And also it's just hard to answer your question about Zoom auditions versus in person. I'm such a sucker for in person. I've done a little bit of casting during this pandemic, and it's just hard. It's hard because they're only doing it the one way that they bring it, which usually, with a 2-page maximum side. It's like 5 minutes, so they'll present it and they're probably nervous and whatever's going on, and that's the end of it. And from my mind, I'm supposed to glean whether this is like the miracle worker that I need for my film. It's kind of hard to do that without being able to sort of give back and, give them something, see how they give it back to you, etc. So like self-tapes are, for me, very difficult still to work on, but I'm sure we'll be doing a lot more of those. And even if you're interviewing, like even if it's a live, like a Zoom interview, it's still not the same. But yeah, it is. I completely agree with what Mary was saying about, as a filmmaker, I think it's also our job to make it the most comfortable, receptive situation as possible, given that it's about 20 minutes of them sort of coming in, giving their best shot. Like, how can I make it smell great? And, for you to just come in and sort of feel welcome and warm. And, it's already going to be nerve-wracking because you have all these random people staring at you, and it's a possible job and everything else. But, try to set it up so that they can give me their best in the 15 or so minutes that, is planned for it. And just also appreciating that it's a lot. These are people who they're coming to try and help me make this project that is so dear to me. It's people are taking time out of their day to support your vision and to bring to life this thing that's been living in your head for all these years. Like, that's a gift to me. Yeah, it's a job for them and et cetera, but it is a gift to me. And so I feel like I need to receive that with a lot of respect. I've been in casting situations where, the producer will be on their phone the whole time and sort of giving sort of the like, impress me kind of attitude. And I think that's really disrespectful. And I don't allow that in my casting spaces because it's not right. This is a person who's actually offering me a gift. And especially if it's something that works, that's beautiful. And so, both ways, I would want them to respect me too, of course. So no to Zoom, yes to in person. It's the bottom line.
And Kentucker, I'm betting that when people audition for you, you probably have an extra empathy for them, having been on the other side of that table.
No, yeah, well, I love what the last couple answers have been in terms of just creating a humane space. It is an inherently kind of like a demoralizing place that can, but if it's sort of like, welcoming and include, and it's sort of like you're getting a human exchange out of it either way, so even if you don't get the job, it's like, oh, I met this person, I felt respected, I felt my time was appreciated. Yeah, I think those are essentials, and it doesn't always feel that way. So I think those are the right sort of ways to approach that. I haven't, so I can't really address the other part of that because I haven't, as a director, I've always just cast from just giving people direct parts. I've never gone through the audition process, except for my first, like, making a movie when I was 24 years old and having no idea what I was asking of people and what I was looking for. And I don't want to go back there in my brain. That was probably very disrespectful. I'm sorry if you went through that process with me back then.
Sorry, if I could just add one more thing. I think one of the things that I found that I talked to my casting director about that really helped too was introducing everybody in the room. Like when you come in, like introducing the casting associate, the casting director, like the person who's filming it, because I think that like a lot of times it does feel like, oh, it's all strangers, but even if it's just like an exchange that maybe adds like a minute to like that session with that person, I think that can really like do a lot. Yeah.
I think that's so important on a human level, and that's my biggest problem with Zoom auditions at the moment is everyone's doing whatever they're doing like from a place where they're master of their own domain, and you don't have an inherent collaboration, like a physical collaboration in the room of like, oh yeah, you're doing something, I'm doing something, they're doing something, we all have a beating heart. Like that is such a part of the process, obviously, of filmmaking at large, but the audition experience in particular. And it's been really frustrating over Zoom because it's reminding me that there's an inherent respect, at least with the people I try to work with, that they have for actors, and that's reciprocated in a really beautiful way. And that feels lacking in Zoom because it's like, well, this is what I do. What do you do? Show me. And it's not malicious. It's still wonderful people, but there's a individualism to it that I find a bummer, for lack of a better word. But like, again, we're in a pandemic. There's not a whole lot we can do. We're all doing our best, but I do look forward to having like curated sessions in person so that everyone is reminded that everybody does have something on the line. There is vulnerability all around. There's artistry all around. And everyone in this room is actually in that moment trying to make something great.
I actually want to take a couple audience questions, and there's one from Suzanne specifically for Rebecca. Do you think self-tapes are here to stay for good instead of in-person auditions? And how can we make those self-tapes pop? Any advice, any tips for giving the best self-tape possible?
Yes, give yourself 2 takes maximum and read with someone that makes you a little nervous. Don't read with a loved one or an actor friend that you feel really supported by. I think that's great. Have those people in your life. But almost all self-tapes, in general, self-tapes lack adrenaline and that performative aspect that happens in an audition room, again, because it's a stress test for yourself. But when you know you can have as long as you want and you can like sort of try to piggyback different moments together, they become unspecific and just not that fun or exciting to watch. So I'd put pressure on yourself to approximate the real situation as much as you can. And again, let it go. Don't obsess about it for an hour and try to approximate things you did in previous takes, because you're going to hand me a massively unspecific self-tape where you tried to do 18 different things at once. And because people are being more likely to say, directors are more likely on a self-tape to be like, well, I don't see everything I'm looking for in this exact tape, they're wrong. The more specific you can give your take, your understanding of it, the more they're likely to want to work with you down the line. And so to the first part of the question, I don't know. Yes, I think self-tapes are here to stay because even for actors' sake, you get to live wherever you want. You don't have to feel like you have to be in New York or LA. And they've maximized what the jobs casting directors can take. They've maximized directors being able to do other things and not have to be in a session for hours. They can, watch tapes after a scout and then find like a few people that they want to meet in person. So I think they're here to stay, but I think you have to learn how to make a really great self-tape, because there will be curated director sessions, at least in my office, because I don't ever want to put someone on set that I'm not sure of the relationship between director and actor. It's not always possible, but it's really important to me that my director is going to set, any kind of set, as excited as possible about every actor they're about to work with. And so me not reading that in exchange in person and having my own sense of safety with that is just not the way I like to work. So I will have director sessions and make sure people get together. But I would suspect, honestly, just because New York and LA real estate's expensive. And so if a casting director doesn't have to have a casting office, that's great. Like that's a practical reason for us why we'll do more off self-tape. So yes, long way of saying yes, I do think they're here to stay, and learn how to get better at them.
We have a question for the filmmakers from Alex. I have my own opinions on this. I'd love to hear yours. Wants to know, what are your thoughts on casting a great actor who you can direct into being your character versus casting an actor who is the character, but who can be incredibly difficult to work with? Yeah, that's my feeling. It's too short.
Yeah. No, you gotta have people on set that you can work with who are willing to be part of the team. You know, all of this is, it's a community of people getting together to create one unified thing. And if there's even like one cog in that wheel that's just so unrelentingly like frustrating or like causing issues, it could just, it's like it creates a whole like, you know, system shutdown. I think it's always better to go with a performer that you feel like you have confidence in and trust in and faith in. And even if they're not there in the audition, I think that, you know, if you feel like you have the faith that you could get them there, I think that that's a much better choice than going with somebody who's going to be really difficult, but is, you know, like an amazing performer, you know, because in the end, it's like, and you feel that in the audition process, you know who those people are, and you know, like, and you get that tension. And if that tension exists there, then it's absolutely going to exist when you have them on set for 4 or 5 days, or much less, you know, 15.
Or if they don't display it, you have a casting director that snitches, and that's what I'll do also. Some people are crafty at hiding it, and then leave and be like, just so you know.
That's good.
Yeah, just to protect that. I think it happened a couple of times with us.
Yeah.
I'm with Mari. I feel like the kinds of situations, you know, Rebecca can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like the kinds of situations where you would prioritize a name or a certain talent despite their bad behavior patterns is because somebody with money is forcing you to, or, you know, is sort of putting pressure. You know, the studio wants this, the production company wants this, they're going to make us so much money because of their name, or they're the ones who are paying for the film in the beginning, you know, to begin with, or something like that. But in my opinion, no, I don't have time. That's asking me to spend all of my time and energy babysitting this one person, as opposed to everybody else that needs my attention on the set. As a woman, as a Black woman, I'm like, no, I'm not here to babysit. Sorry, not today. It's not my style. So everything Mari said, I agree.
There's also so many talented actors out there. I'm sure you could find a really talented actor who isn't a pain in the ass.
Yes. I mean, that was the thing that was really wonderful, but kind of haunting in my experience of casting, particularly for Naomi, our AAPI lead. It was just like the level of talent that exists out here that's still untapped is so vast. And for every like 4th or 5th person that we had on the I was like, I have to write a role for this person because they're so effing talented. And it's like, so there's always somebody out there who just maybe hasn't had their shot yet that deserves it. And they're going to deliver that performance that you need over the person that's maybe going to give you an additional like $15,000.
We have a question from, forgive me if I mispronounce anyone's name, Nuala. It's actually a couple questions, but the one that interests me is she wants to know about collaborating with actors. Do rehearsals bring up a lot of changes once they're cast? And I would just love to add to that, if there's some examples of maybe where you sort of worked with an actor and it changed the scene or it changed the character at all, or you helped them get through a moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I've done that. I've had certainly suggestions, you know, oftentimes the roles that I've written have been things that people can relate to in some way. And so they'll bring their own personal experience to it in the character development. Sometimes it's changed language. There were parts in Farewell Amor that I'd written the whole script in English. I don't speak Portuguese, neither do my actors, but one of my actors was very insistent that it didn't make sense for this Portuguese speaking family to be most comfortable speaking English the whole time. And so we did the work together to figure out what parts of the script could be translated, you know, and what would that look like, and what was the intention there, and those kinds of things. And, you know, and it's not that, it doesn't mean that every recommendation or suggestion that my actors have worked for the film. You know, my job as the director is that I have the bigger picture, so I'm able to be like, that works there, it doesn't work over here. But yeah, I think that's a wonderful part of the process, is that we're building the characters together. I personally love doing that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's really great about the rehearsal process is like having that opportunity not just to read lines with an actor, but like being able to like really dig into like the character, the backstory, the relationships between the characters. I found that to be like a lot more helpful in like helping like develop a character, where they'll say something that's really interesting or maybe taken from their own experiences or experience of others, or something that they've read or seen that like connects, and then suddenly that'll like launch into a whole new thing. I was working on a short. I was just in one of those phases where, and I think we all get there as filmmakers, where we just get so frustrated about not being able to make a movie that we're like, oh, we'll just make it ourselves and we'll shoot one day. It'll be this weird short that no one will see, but it doesn't matter because I made it. And it was, it's just this little thing that I'd written, and it was so wonderful because I sat down with the actor who was going to be playing the character, and he just built out, without even telling me, just like this whole backstory. And then that backstory that he had built completely changed all the dialogue and the meaning of the story, and in this way that like really just elevated this very like goofy little like short thing that I was just trying to get off the ground, and really just brought a lot more emotionality to just the whole experience, and also to the other actor as well. And I think that when you find those people, it's like, oh, it's just so exciting. It just feels like you're on fire and you're like, oh my God, this has happened. Yeah.
Yeah, that's ideal when somebody can quickly embody the character and inject it with this personality, this identity, and just make it real like that. I mean, that's a lot to ask somebody to give that to a role. And I think first time early actors don't realize that how much that is to give, because you give it one time and then it's almost like you can't go back to that well again in the same way. So it is a lot to ask, and I think but it inherently makes the project way more interesting really quickly. I would add to that, just sort of like in addition to the contextual stuff, the themes, the characters, I think a lot of working with actors for me is like as a timing kind of thing, or less about dialogue or character, more about just a tone or a feeling, or just the subtext that oftentimes gets overlooked, and just like, what is this character trying to say? At what pace are they saying it? Maybe they're trying to say it a little too quickly, or the pauses aren't quite, just add a beat here or slow down, or just simple directions that can kind of unlock a new read on it. Particularly if it's something that's been hashed and rehashed, and it's just like you're stuck in this one reading of a line, and just oftentimes just slowing it down, like slow down 50%, and then it's sort of like, oh, okay, that feels better. And I think as a director, I think giving actors really simple directions is very helpful, rather than trying to overcorrect or sort of like try to fix everything at once. I think particularly in between takes, I think keeping it very simple, maybe like one simple direction, that I think can really unlock something more natural.
Yeah, I think, speaking also as a person who's edited a lot, that is so true, that so many times you'll find those takes where the actor's just staring off into space, and somehow that evokes the emotion that you need at the end of the scene. It's just, but it is that thing where it's like, I did that as well on a short where I over explained on the day, like that I was like directing this actor. I was like, here's this entire backstory that I was just like concocted in my head, and then it totally threw them off for like 4 or 5 takes, because it was just, I had delivered way too much information, and it was then the performance was reading as somebody trying to comb through all of that instead of just being, and allowing the story and the scene and the characters and the scenario that you've created to get us there.
How do you sort of learn to talk to actors? I know that's kind of a funny question, but I feel like, in film school, or maybe they do now, but they don't really teach you that, and Kentucker, especially for you from the acting side, you probably know what you like from directors, but how do you sort of learn to get on the same page or have that same language? And is it different for every actor?
Yeah, it is different from every actor, and I don't think they teach it as much as they should in film schools. I mean, I think that's the central, you can have all the tech, the lighting, the beautiful images, but if you don't have that central connection point between a director and actor, it's sort of all lost in a way. And it's incredibly challenging, and it is different for everyone. And I think that's where the trust and the shorthand and the building up of a relationship is so fundamental, that it's almost like your job is just to have a good relationship with the actor. And once that happens, I think it just allows for this sense of like, we're working on this together. I trust that you trust me. I give you the agency to come up with this character and to flesh it out in the way that you see fit. And it's just like this partnership. And I think just not overcomplicating it, I think is so much of it is just casting the right person. If you have the right person, you shouldn't need to do much adjustment. And I think that just allows for a really, really fresh sight, on-set experience, when it just feels like there's air. It's not, it's just flowing in a very natural way. There's not like this sense of like something's kind of never working and you kind of talk it out. And it's just sort of like, if there's that space where it's just the actor does the acting, the director does just very slight minor adjustments. And then there's just like, it just has this like refreshing quality on set. And I think it just gets too chatty a lot of times. And I think if you're at that point where you're trying to figure it out on set, speaking like theoretically, I think it's already kind of lost. So I think it's so vital to get the right person and to kind of figure these things out beforehand.
And in defense of the audition process, that is what we're trying to do. I did drag it a bit earlier, so I feel like protective of of holding space for auditions. But that is the first time to see if that language is compatible and what the actor is going to need, and also for the directors, honestly, to practice, articulating it and communicating, and also why bringing in all sorts of actors is important to the process. Is that's also how directors learn what they want. They can, sort of steal little moments here and there, or they heard it in this completely different way. It unlocked something about a character. So then when they get to set, they have this other understanding of it because they have started to workshop it a bit. So it is important, as much as that's also awful.
And I would suggest also, what's worked for me, and no, I didn't learn, film school was a lot more theoretical. I took a lot of acting workshops and just worked with actors, just practiced working with actors afterwards, which, getting into groups or film groups or whatever, because actors like to practice too. It's great for all of us to build. And what I found, when I can figure it out, it's kind of hard with the pressure, especially when you're in a casting situation, is to try and give physical directions as opposed to like, something that's very heady, as Kentucker was saying, your mother died when you were 13 and that left, and the neighbor's dog got run over. It's like, so then you can kind of see them thinking about it, as opposed to, you have terrible gas right now, action, and then they can kind of work on what it feels like to have terrible gas, as opposed to trying to recreate what it was like for my dog to be run over. And that is a little easier for the actor, but I think as a director, what I have to do is to practice being able to come up with that quickly. Especially if you have a small budget and you can't afford to do zillions and zillions of takes, you need to practice. It's a muscle that you just need to strengthen.
Absolutely. Well, I can't believe we're already at 1 o'clock and you've all been so generous to spend this time with us. I want to thank you so much for being here. I want to thank everyone for watching at home. And I guess if you want to drop any information in the chat box, let people know where they can find you, where they can find your work, that would be amazing. But thank you all so much for joining us and for being a part of this today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks, Janelle. Thank you to everyone for joining. And yes, please continue to check back for our schedule, and to all our panelists. Thank you so much. This conversation was really wonderful. So have a great rest of the festival, everyone. Bye.